Hello everybody, Mark Bremer back with another tutorial in this series by Renderosity for POSER 10 and POSER Pro 2014. In this tutorial we are going to start combining some techniques we've been learning incrementally in different tutorials. And in this one we're going to concentrate on adding grunge and creating, or how we create metal textures using the capabilities with POSER. I need to say that, and we'll do this in 3 steps. We're going to do kind of a grunge map for buildings and architecture. We're going to do shiny metal objects, and it can be applied to glass. And then we're going to do a complex, dirty metal texture that we can do for an industrial, post-apocalyptic society if you want. But there's some ways to apply this very, very beautifully to some nice scenes as well. I do need to say that I am going to cover some things in this tutorial, or I should say use some techniques that we have learned in the tutorials preceding this, specifically the outdoor tutorial. So when I start jumping through things like normal maps, I'm not spending time explaining how I make the maps, the software that I use them, those types of things, because that's covered in that outdoor series. So take a look at that and the indoor one. It would be good to just be familiar with those things. Okay, we are going to create the kind of grunge in this first example of a building that's outside, or anything that's outside that has had rain hit it, and the raindrops come down, they bounce up, and the area closer to the ground gets this kind of layer of grime and dirt on it. We'll create it first with just basic colors so you can see how the effect works. I'll explain it, and so you can kind of understand the thinking of where to look in POSER to find this stuff. And then what we'll do is bring in a photo texture, because it looks realistic, it's fast and easy, and I'm all about fast and easy. And you'll see what a difference it makes. So with this object selected, let's go ahead and come over to the materials room. The typical type of material that we see. So we've got our basic color. The whole point behind grunge is that you start overlaying or blending together light and dark things to get that idea of dirt and grime. So with that idea in mind, what I need to do is blend something. So the first node I'll put in here happens to be new node, math, blender. So that pops in here and we get an input 1 and input 2, and then we're blending them together. So let's explain how this works. This blending mode right now is set at 0.5%. 1 means it's fully applied, 0 means nothing is going on at all. If I use, say, 2 texture maps, or if I just change the color right in here, let me go ahead and make this one darker. Nothing really changes here. I need to go ahead and plug this into the diffuse color. And we see everything kind of go uniformly gray. What this 0.5% means is that it's taking half of one and half of the other and putting them together on the object. I don't want to do that. I want it to be darker on the bottom than the top. So what I need to do is control this blending. Well, how do I do that? I'm going to bring in something that POSER doesn't have. Despite all the cool control sets and math functions and everything like that, POSER doesn't give you a particularly good way. In fact, it really doesn't give you any way that I'm familiar with to create gradient ramps. What's a gradient ramp, you might say? Let me go ahead and drag one over that I'm going to be working with from Photoshop. You can create these things in whatever you want. It can be any painting program, even vector programs like Illustrator will output gradients. I am naming this one Ramp Fast 90. And the reason for that, you don't need to know my naming conventions, but it just lets me know that it goes from dark to white really fast, and the 90 lets me know I've rotated this 90 degrees. Most gradients go left to right. I just say 90 if it goes top to bottom. Okay, so you see a little bit into my twisted world there. Okay, back into POSER here. I need to add a texture map. Come down to image map. Move this over so we can see it, and I will go track this thing down in the folder that it's in. Let's go with Ramp Fast 90. You can see it kind of show up here in the corner. And choose OK, and OK again. Now, watch what happens. If I plug this straight into the blending mode, you'd think everything should work hunky-dory. And it does for the short term here. I'm going to go ahead and use some texture maps, and we'll see something else going on that we may want to control a little bit better. Let's go ahead and add one more texture map. And this is going to be a tiling brick texture map because, well, it looks realistic, and I'm efficient. And we will use this one, and it just goes in there and we grab it. And if I say, okay, let's use this texture map and plug it into input 1, and input 2, well, it's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and jump in here a little bit. Now, we're getting some pretty heavy darkness across the board right here. So what I need to do is come to the blending mode, and let's go ahead and crank this up to 1, which means it's going to be blending things absolutely 100%. But what we're doing with this image map over here is controlling what gets applied where. And this is looking, yeah, it's looking okay. If I say, you know what, that's too dark, then I can come here and lighten this color that's controlling the influence of that a little bit. Still too dark? Well, let's make it lighter still. And it starts lightening up. So pretty cool little technique. If we want to do any special effects at all, and there's a good reason you may want to do it, make things glow, that type of thing, you can add another node in here, and it is a math node, and it's going off the screen there. Let's come to math and create a math function. This allows us to control specifically how this image map is interpreted by the Blender node. And by that I mean it's got this little option under math argument that has things like add, subtract, multiply, divide, and then all these other mathematical functions if you want to work with them. If you've had any time with Photoshop, you're probably familiar with subtract, multiply, and divide. If I say, for example, okay, let's disconnect this directly from here, disconnect. And what I'll do now is plug it into the value 1 that's being applied 100%, and then apply this math function back into the blend mode. We don't see a big change going on right here. However, let me make this just a little bit darker, you know, for the sake of example. And if I change these blending modes right here to subtract, well, nothing happened there. How about multiply? Everything is going dark. If I say divide, then we can get some glow techniques. There's some kind of pretty fun stuff that you can do with these, and it's a great bunch of fun to play with these things and change stuff out. So we won't spend time with that, but know that the first thing that you need is a blender mode. You need to control that with a ramp so you can control the top to bottom, and this is driven by the UV map coordinates that are on there. And then we've got an image map that we use twice in the input nodes, and we control how dark or light it is simply by the color inputs for input 1 and input 2. Let me get rid of this math node here real quick. As an aside, when you do this, let me collapse these things a little bit. You can also take this blender and say, I want this to also affect the specular color, and bring it in so that if you've got highlights going on, that where it gets down dirty, you wouldn't expect bright highlights. You'd expect that to get dark too. And you can do the same thing with bump maps. If you're filling stuff up with mud, whatever you want to do, you can use the same technique to control this blending across any existing texture map you have. So it's really cool for buildings that you've got. If you've got things from, you know, well, there's a whole host of folks out there that make content. So hey, that's how you do that. Let's move on to the next example here. And we'll close this one. Don't need it any longer. Don't save. We will take a look at making shiny objects a little more believable now. Everybody that I've ever met, including myself, one of the first things you do when you realize, hey, I can make shiny objects, is you make, you know, a chrome ball or something like that, and it just screams, I'm new to 3D. But that's okay. We all do it, and we laugh at ourselves. Let's use some of the capabilities we've got to add some believable scratches and irregularities to this. Here's our object. We'll pop into the materials room, and to save ourselves a little bit of time, let's come up to the add reflection. This is going to engage some of the ray trace nodes that we'd learned about earlier for reflections in that outdoor tutorial. And since these are all here and they're all kind of in the way, what I want to do is come up here and drag across all of them, highlight them, and I will right click and say collapse into compound node. This lets me tidy up my scene a little bit and get that out of the way. Okay, if we're going to render this, let's see what it looks like before we start messing around with it. We can see the shadow being reflected. We see the edge of the surface. This node has a color that's being reflected. So to make this a little more believable, like it's a metal object, and again you can pull these same tricks with glass, but we'll concentrate on metal. I'm going to change the diffuse color and give us some kind of nice, well, steely type of color. And yeah, we'll just leave it like that. We'll render this up again. And now we can see, okay, well, it's bluish, chromy, but this highlight is huge, and that's a giveaway that it's not a very, well, shiny object. You would come down to the highlight size. Currently it's at 0.1, and we can reduce that down and make it smaller. We're going to be increasing this, I think, shortly because, well, I kind of know how it works. But if I say, all right, let's make this a value of 0.01 instead of 0.1, and we do a render, this highlight's going to get smaller, and this suddenly starts looking like a metallic object. The problem is that, I'm going to zoom in so we can see this a little bit better, is that everything's perfect on it. There is no sense of reality coming in. So let's change that a little bit. We'll do that with the technique we just learned for the bricks and creating grunge and types of things. We need to create a blender. So let me come down to Math, Blender. You know how the inputs work now, and what I want to do is plug in a different kind of texture map. I know I'm going to have to bring this up to 1 to make sure it blends 100% between the values the texture map's controlling. And we'll pick up a little thing that I've got. It's what should I say, a texture map I created that looks like scratches. And you may be saying, where do you get cool texture maps for these types of effects? Go to cgtextures.com. They've got a ton of free textures that can save you a bunch of time. And the last one we're going to do in here, I used one of their examples, and it's just super cool. So anyhow, enough of that. Image source. I'll pick out this one, and I've got something called web. And so you can kind of see it. It looks like just those types of curly scratches you get on metal and those types of things after you've had it around for a while. I just use this for a whole host of things, and you'll see how here. So let's drive the blending with this map. If you want to see what it looks like, there it is. And I'm going to leave everything the same right here. Okay, yay for us. Let's take this blender and plug it into the specular color. Let's plug this into highlight size. And I'm going to take this opportunity to maybe bring that back to 0.1. The reason why is that this map that we've got going on here, it's got pure black and white in it, which means it's going to blend completely between these two colors right here. And if I have one white, it's going to be super sharp, and if it's black, it's going to be super diffuse. You'll see what goes on here in just a second. So let me close that up. The last place I may want to put this is down here under reflection value. And that's set right now at 100%, but again, we're modifying that, amending that with this blender mode. So now that we've plugged it in everywhere, let's go ahead and re-render this real quick. And no change. The reason is we need to change these values right here. One of them, doesn't really matter which one. I'll grab this bottom one and let's make this much darker, significantly darker. When we render this again, we should see just this. Look, we're starting to see these scratches showing up. It's influencing the reflection. Someplace there's reflection, someplace there's not. Likewise with the highlights. If this is too aggressive, then I can go ahead and lighten up that blending color. Just like with making the grunge on the buildings change, you just play with these two input values to control the significance of that effect. Okay, well that's nice, but it's a pretty coarse pattern. Well, in that case, let's go ahead and disclose this texture map. We'll come down to the UV scale, and let me go ahead and have this. It will automatically tile because you'll notice down here, image mapped tile is the setting. That was the UV scale. Sorry, that was the U scale. Let's go to the V scale, 0.5. And a quick render will reveal some very nice reflection and highlight changes in here to D-perfect to make imperfect this type of reflection. And really important, you can do this with glass in terms of transparency, all sorts of things to simply make things look more realistic. Okay, cool. Let's come back over here and close this. We don't need this any longer. And let's create a new scene. Goodbye, Andy. Now, one last thing to look for here. I want to bring in, here we go, one-sided square. The reason I'm bringing this one in instead of, say, the plane or something is that it's already standing up, and by now you know I'm, well, energy efficient. Okay, Let's scale this out. I know the texture map I'm using is very horizontal and not very tall, so I'm going to grab the X scale. And you know what? To make this more obvious, let's get a spotlight in here. Let me back up a little bit. This will help show off the techniques that we're going to be using here for this. So create light, spot. Nice. This plane right here, let's rename this to something that actually makes sense. We'll call it metal wall. Since that's what we're doing, I'll highlight this spotlight right here. We'll come up to Object, Point At, scroll down, find a metal wall, choose OK. And now we'll be able to see the bumps, the normal maps, all that type of stuff a little more effectively. Let me come back to parameters and push this out just a little bit on the translate scale. Z, let's come out here a little more. There we go. Nice illumination going on the wall. Okay. We'll zoom in back to this a little bit and pop into our material room. And the light's selected, so let's choose something else here real quick. Come back to figure. Where's our figure? What's under props? Metal wall. There we go. POSER surface. The first thing we'll do is add a texture map for our wall. And again, cgtextures.com. Awesome stuff there. Most of them are free. You can pay for stuff if you want. I do because I downloaded so many stinking textures for my job. Okay, let's load in the one I downloaded, which is rusted metal. And so you can see it. It's kind of like a cargo container that's been sitting out way too long and had the daylights beat out of it in the course of being used. I'll open that, validate that, and we'll plug this in to this area. So let me zoom in here a little bit. Now, while the texture or photographic texture is cool, this is a really, well, it screams fake again. There's no bumps. Everything is kind of evenly placed. If we render this real quickly, and again, this is just the stock lighting setup, you know, it's okay. We're looking to really ramp up the reality of your scenes. And even if you buy content from Renderosity that's already got, you know, textures for the buildings and everything, you can use these same techniques to further improve them if you want. So okay, what are we going to do here? Let's go ahead and make life easy on ourselves. I'm going to first rename this Diffuse, just so I can keep track of them when I shrink them up. I'll right click and go copy and then go paste. And this pops in here. Let's expand it and load in. Now we're going to get some of those other texture maps that I happen to make with Crazy Bump. There's other tools out there to do that, and you can certainly do it with Photoshop or painting programs. So let's go to Browse. I'm going to track down my, let's go with our Specular. This one's got some darker colors in here because, well, it's rust. If the light's going to reflect, I want it to pick up the same colors that are on the surface below it, and then the bright white spots, it's simply going to be able to reflect a little bit more because there's edges there. So I'll choose Open, Validate, and let's plug this into Specular Color. Now, again, important to note that the value here is 100 or 1, which means it's going to be reading completely from this texture file. That's what we want. That's okay. Let's come back to Preview. And we'll see as these things change here a little bit. Let me go ahead and do Paste again. And we'll dump in our normal map here now. So let me change this to normal. And we will plug this into the gradient bump down here. Big change because we don't have anything, well, we've got the wrong thing added in there. Let's go ahead and snag that normal map, which gives us much more detail, complete detail than a low resolution bump map. So we'll come back up here to normal. We get one of these wacky kind of a rainbow colored, mostly blue though, types of maps. I'll choose Open for that, validate that. That pops in, and you know what, that may be a little too significant, so let's bring this back to like 0.8. We'll adjust and tune these things up a little bit later. So for what else do we need here? Let's go ahead and collapse this, paste in one more, and we'll name this Occlusion, or Oc, since, well, it's faster. And we will choose the occlusion map that's been made. And you can see kind of light bumps. This just helps darken it up where I want to darken it. Choose open. Yep, that's the one I want. And let's plug this occlusion in. There's always several places you can put it. In this case, what I'm going to do is, let's go ahead and leave it hanging here for just a second. I want to see how it looks before I use that. So let's do one more paste, and I created a special bump map for this. And let me show you why. This is something that wasn't done with Crazy Bump. And the reason is, and so I can talk through what's going on. This is a really mechanical shape. It's got these straight bars that go up with rivets on it. Well, Crazy Bump, or the automated ones, aren't going to know that, and they're concentrating mostly on the light and dark, the software that creates the normal maps and the occlusion maps, that type of stuff. So what I did was simply went in and made a selection, which you can kind of see here in this map here, and the edges on this are fuzzy, so I get a better blend when I use this as a bump map. The harsh edges, and I've got one of those right here, it's super crisp, and that just screams fake again when you use it. So what I did was created and exported a JPEG file, which just, well, it looks like this. So that's what I'll be bringing in, and that's the logic behind using it. So let's go ahead and do paste, and we'll change this one to bump. Load in the bump map. Da-da-dun. And then we'll be ready to do a render and take a look at this. Now you may already be thinking, hey, wait a minute, can you apply that you know, kind of a grunge technique we did on the brick? And the answer is absolutely yes. In fact, we'll do that so you can kind of see the impact of being able to create very, very flexible textures. Okay, this is getting plugged into the bump channel. Not seeing a huge difference in the update here, but let's go ahead and render this out. See a little bit more of what's going on. Getting kind of a nice look occurring with that. The can increase some of these effects if we want to, and really just start playing around with it. It looks like, to my eye, the bump map's kind of inverted here in the way it's displaying on this, and that might have to do with the normal map actually. Let's go to tangent space, see what happens when I render that up. There, that made all the difference. So again, coming down once you use the normal map to go ahead and change the gradient mode to what works best for the scene. Got those three options between tangent and object space versus just plain old gradient bump. See which one works best for your scene in terms of reproduction. So we've got that set up now. Let's slide this light around because it's looking fairly dark. So let's come back to pose. And I don't know that I'll need that occlusion map now that I'm looking at it. We'll come over to lights and choose light 5, which I didn't bother to name, but let's see if that's the right one by moving it around a little bit. Z translate. Yep, that's the one. Let's call this brilliantly wall spot. Okay, so if we do a render at this point, here is a very nice looking grungy wall. Last step, let's go ahead and blend in a grunge so that this gets darker near the ground. If you had some plants you brought in, that type of thing, this would just be perfect. You can have your, you know, assassin character leaning against that, or melancholy scene of an old car. We'll come back to materials. Let's choose the object we're actually working with. Props, metal wall. We get this going on right here, and so what we need to do, let me get all these others out of the way. Don't need to open them up. We've got this diffuse channel right here, and what we'll do is we'll disconnect this. Disconnect. We will be using it. Now you can see a nice, well, gray version of that. Remember, we need the blender to blend two things together. I'm just going to plug this in right now. We will need the ramp. So I've got another 2D texture I'm going to add to it. Let me get this over so you can see where I'm snagging all this stuff. Let's find that ramp again. There it is. Double click on that. Okay. And I'll bring this into blending. turn blending up to 1, so it blends 100%, and now it's controlled completely by this texture map. I'll collapse that, and we have our diffuse color right here. So what I'll do is plug in that texture JPEG one time and then the second time to both inputs. Everything looks normal, but now we can make it darker at the base by changing the value of that top input node. So it gets darker right there. Again, we can change the method of the ramp either in a painting program or start adding in noise and things like that. If I want it to go a little bit darker, let's make it grungier. Super. If we come back to our pose room, do a quick render, now suddenly we get some excellent grunge going on near the ground. This is how you start working with the tool sets, especially for metals and grunge, where you start blending together and controlling input to the materials tree that goes ahead and gives you these nice blended effects based on kind of height, ways that you can go ahead and mix in and take the raw diffuse channels and start considering using them. Look at these nice bumps here where the rust is going in with normal maps, that type of thing. This is how you start aging and adding extra realism to your outdoor scenes of metal and building materials, working with POSER 10 and POSER Pro 2014.